So now that we're generating a token and we're sending it to the consumer when they log in, we can protect an endpoint so that only a logged in user can access it by providing their authorization token. So let's begin this by creating a new protected endpoint, which is going to be get users. And this one is going to allow a user to fetch their own profile information, including the name, their own name and email. Now think of this again like the hotel analogy. So in this case, we're giving someone access to their own room. All right, firstly, we want to create a new route in the user router file. So this is going to be a get route. So I'm going to chain a get here, and I'll pass in a new controller method, and this one will be called read. Let's now create a controller method profile by adding a read property to the exports, and we're going to assign this an async function, and of course it's going to have our rec and res arguments like that. The first thing that we're going to do in our controller method is get the token from the authorization header. So we're going to create a new variable token, and we're going to assign to that rec.header, which is how we access the headers of a request in Express. So the header with the token is authorization. So this is a method, and we just have to pass in authorization as a string. And remember that the header value is going to be in the form bearer space token. So we're going to have to pass the token value out of this. So to do that, we're going to use the native JavaScript string method called split, and that allows you to specify a character to split your string on, and it'll turn that into an array. So if we split on the space, we're going to get an array back, and it's going to have two members. The first one is going to be the string bearer, and the second one is going to be the actual token string. So let's just access that second array member, which is going to be index 1 like that. Okay, so that's going to successfully pass out our token, but consider the token might not actually be present in the header, which would be the case if an unauthorized user tried to access the endpoint related to this. So that would mean that this code here could throw an error because we'd be trying to access an array member here on an array that doesn't exist. So to fix that, we're going to have to put this into a try catch block. That way we can handle the error. So how we're going to do this is we're actually going to declare the token variable at the top like that, and in the try block we're just going to put an assignment. So that way we can use this token underneath this method as well. So finally what we're going to do here is we're going to handle the catch, and in that case we're going to use res, and we're going to set a status of 401. So 401 is unauthorized, so that's the appropriate status that you want to use for any authorization issues, as opposed to say 400, which is bad request, or 500 for server error or whatever. And while we're at it, we're also going to send a JSON object back, and it's going to have a message, and that message is going to be authorization token invalid, like that. And by the way, we're actually going to return this here because we're going to put some more code underneath this. Now that we have the token, we need to find the user corresponding to the token. So this is going to be a database query, so it's going to be appropriate to make another custom schema method for this. Before we do though, let's actually create a try catch block where this method's going to get used. And inside the try, we're going to call user find by token. That's going to be the name of our new method, so we'll have to define that later. Now, unlike our previous schema method, this one's going to be a static method. meaning we're going to apply it to the abstract model rather than a specific instance of the model. So we're going to design this method so it's going to take token as an argument. And since it's going to be doing a database query, we're going to have to await the output, and we'll assign that to a constant user when we find it. I've actually just made a mistake there. That should be users. Over in our user model now, let's define our findByToken method. So declare a static method. We call the user schema, and we access the statics property. And we can now make a new subproperty, and this one will be findByToken. And we're going to assign this an async function, and it's going to take the token as an argument. Let's now define a variable called payload, and this variable is going to store the decoded JSON Web Token payload. So to decode the token, we're going to use the JWT method, verify. And this is basically the opposite to the sign method that we used before. So this method will take the token and the salt value as arguments. So the salt value is process.env JWT secret. Now keep in mind that the verify method is going to throw an error if the token is invalid. So what we want to do is wrap this in a try catch, and we'll move this line into there like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to throw this error if we catch one so it can be handled elsewhere. Now finally, the last thing I want to do is we only actually need the ID in the payload. So let's go ahead and deconstruct the payload and just get the ID. So we use that shorthand like that just to get the underscore ID. Now after we've decoded the payload and extracted the ID, what we want to do now is find the user associated with it. So to do this, we can use the Mongoose findOne method. So this method allows us to pass in an object with the conditions that we want to find a record based on. So let's go ahead and go this dot findOne, and then we can pass in an object, and the conditions that we want to match on is firstly the ID, so we can just use the property value shorthand like that. And we also need to match the token itself, because remember that the user needs to provide an exact match to that token that we've created for them in their request. So we'll make the second condition token like that, and what we're actually going to do is return the promise that's returned from this method call here. Back over in our controller file now, this findByToken method, it should work now, and it's going to hopefully return the correct user, or it's going to throw an error. Well, it's actually going to return a promise that will resolve to that user more specifically. But since we're awaiting that, what we can do is just go ahead on the next line, and we can send the user object back like that. And finally what we're going to do is add a res in our catch block, and we can go res.status, and remember that we set a 401 status here, because if that fails, it means that they haven't provided a correct token. So what we can do is also send back the error that we get, and that's going to help them debug on the client side. So now our endpoint and the authorization process should now work. So let's test it with Postman by creating a new request, and this one will be get users, and we'll save that to our collection. And next what we want to do is, we've already got it set as a get request by default, so the URL will be the URL token variable, followed by users. And let's just go ahead and send this like it is and see what happens. So you'll see that we get a 401 unauthorized error, and we get the message authorization token invalid. So this is obviously, this is coming from this line here in the catch block, where because we couldn't actually get the token from the header. And this makes sense because we didn't actually provide a token over here in Postman yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to now add we can go to the headers section of this request, and we can add a header to our request. So we can create one up here, and the key is authorization, and then the value is bearer followed by the token. So we don't have a value for the token yet, so let's just put an X in there for now. So let's just try it like that and see what happens. Now we get a 401 unauthorized again, but this time we get a different error. And this one is this is coming from the JSON Web Token verify method, because it's going to fail, and we're getting back this error, JWT malformed. So let's now get a valid token in here, and to do that, we're actually going to use one from the post users request that we've already got here, because remember that this is our registration request and a token comes back with that. And so what we can do is get that token from the header here, save that as an environment variable in Postman, and then we can go and use it in our get users request up here like this. So we can just put the token in there. So how we're going to do that is we're going to come to the tests tab up here like we've done before. And the first thing we do is create a variable token, and we use the get response header method, and we pass in authorization. And very similar how we did it over in Express, we split that and we access the first array member. So basically the same thing we did in Express. Then all we need to do is go postman dot set environment variable, and the name of the environment variable is token, and the value is the token that we just passed out of the header. I just noticed I made a mistake here. It should be set environment variable. All right, so let's go ahead and save that, and then what we want to do is now run this again. Before we do that, we've got to go to our body and make sure that we're providing a unique email address, and then we can send that. And if we look in the test results, everything worked, and we can go up here to our environment and we can inspect our environment, and you'll see now we have a token variable and we have a value for that now. So that's obviously it looks like it's a working JSON Web Token. So now that we have that, coming back to our get users request, we'll hopefully have a correctly set authorization header when we run this. So I'm going to try run this again. And this time you can see the request was successful and we got back these user details. So with that done, we've not only successfully implemented our get users endpoint, but we now have a working JWT authentication system.